So, I felt like starting a two-part mini-series on the immune system and vaccines. Um, I'm an immunologist, so I love to speak about the immune system in general. My YouTube channel, I started it mainly to talk a bit more about spiritual things, mental development, spiritual development, reincarnations, these kind of things. But I'm obviously still drawn to the health sector. I'm trying to be as healthy as I can. I'm still in the process of learning a lot of things. I I changed quite a few things in my life to become healthier, to see what impacts health, including the immune system. And so I still absorb quite a lot of material. I listen to a lot of podcasts, YouTube videos. I listen to a lot of influencers in the health sector and in the spiritual sector. And when I listen to things that bridge a bit, the more holistic with the more detailed biological explanations or the immunology behind it, I oftentimes I feel myself cringe. It's as soon as like people try to explain immunology in particular from a holistic point of view, or what type of things they implemented in their lives to impact the immune system in a beneficial way. The way they explain it, it's always from a if you're aware of advanced immunology, it sounds a bit it's a bit jarring because some of the terminology is not exact, and there's a lot of bastardization of the different concepts, and so I thought I'd like to offer my own perspective, or at least like a brief overview of my perspective on the immune system, what it means to have a strong immune system, if that means anything, and also obviously throw into the mix the topic of vaccines. I tried to avoid it so far, and so that's going to be the topic of the second part of this mini series. And I will certainly be as objective as I can. I'll throw in my opinions because some things are still kind of up in the air, but I'll really attempt to give you my perspective from a very advanced immunological point of view. I won't explain all of the things, but at least when things get complicated, I'll say so instead of oversimplifying everything. So let's start. So again, this idea to talk about this just recently, I by chance I just happened to listen to a few YouTube streams or videos of people talking about the immune system and various issues, how they overcame their issues, and from a holistic point of view. A lot of the hype, of course, there's the vaccine hype around immunology and everything that happened with COVID. There's a lot of hype around the immune system in terms of longevity as well, so healthy aging. Can you push the boundaries a bit, through the immune system in terms of health span, and in particular, like why I guess there's so many views or so many followers that follow that type of content is there seems to be, I guess there's room for discussion around natural ways to influence the immune system versus drugs. and how many supplements and which supplements you should or could take, to which do X, Y, and Z, and then interpreting the various studies, a lot of them being conducted in animals and mice in particular with regards to immunology. And so I just wanted to give a bit of a, not introduction, but just talk about the immune system, and perhaps clarify a few things that have been said by other content creators or their guests. So the first thing to say is that the immune system is extremely complex, and even now we don't fully understand the extent to which the immune system, or what is the immune system, what is immunity. And throughout my career, the definition of what an immune response is, or what physiological system it impacts in the body, has continuously expanded. So much so that it impacts basically the entire human physiology. I mean, or maybe whatever, at 98%, 99%. It impacts everything. Even from an outsider's point of view, if you're not familiar with immunology and you think, well, it's only to defend against viruses, bacteria, there are systems in the body that are largely influenced by the immune system, and it would kind of surprise you, it would shock you, because it impacts basically everything. So the immune system is not just a defense mechanism. The immune system is set up to regulate basically physiology or homeostasis in the body, and which is one of the reasons why, if you look at chronic diseases these days, like including things like metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, these chronic diseases have a major, if not dominant, immune component. And so this is not surprising for someone who is an immunologist, but I think it sometimes surprises people that come from the outside. And so that complexity is reflected by the different immune cell subsets. And so you have a lot of people talking about, well, the lowest hanging fruit is white blood cells. So in the blood, you have red blood cells. That's why the blood is red. These are erythrocytes. They just circulate oxygen throughout the body. And then if you would take blood apart, there are other cell subsets which are basically colorless or white, which is why you call them white blood cells. So then some people talk about leukocytes, leuko coming from the basic blood, or lymphocytes, referring to the lymph. That's the lymphatics. That's where the immune system or the immune cells recirculate through your blood system to the organs or to the tissue external, and then recirculate, and then re-egress back into the blood, recirculate, go outside at a particular tissue, traffic through the lymph back into the blood system. So lymphocytes, leukocytes, white blood cells, but this is not what kind of immunologists talk about. I mean, every single immunologist typically is very focused or specialized in one, potentially several, but usually one main immune cell subset. So if you look at my career or my publication list, it's mostly T cells. So T cells is a subset of white blood cells or lymphocytes in the blood. They obviously occur as well in the organs, and there's different flavors of them, many, and so sometimes the specialization goes down into, well, are you a CD8 T cell person, are you a CD4 T cell person? Within those, there's also several other subsets. And so when you do academic research in immunology, you highly specialize. You try to figure something new out about one particular mechanism within the immune system. And of course, you're aware of the rest of the immune system, and you would probably know more than someone that you would ask randomly on the street, but still you wouldn't know as much as another immunologist that has expertise in a different area. So there's T cells, there's B cells, there's also NK cells, natural killer cells. Also T cells, T stands for thymus because it's in the thymus that this little gland where the education of the T cells occur. Education meaning you want a T cell that recognizes something foreign but doesn't recognize yourself. Right? That's where T cells go to school, so to speak, to limit autoimmunity and to favor defense mechanisms against viruses or other pathogens intracellular. And so there's T cells. Within the T cells, there's cytotoxic T cells. They typically are called CD8 T cells. And then there's helper T cells with different flavors again, which express the marker CD4. And then there's T cells that interact with B cells. And then there's follicular helper T cells and regular T cells. So there's a lot of different flavors of all these things. B cells, also like depending on their developmental path or how advanced they are to being an antibody producing cell. There's different stages of B cell development. And NK cells, natural killer cells, they're a bit like a T cells, but they don't have a T cell receptor, so they can kill. They can kill various cells, including cancer cells, but they don't do so in a very antigen-specific manner. And so these are kind of what we call lymphocytes in the blood. But then we also distinguish between the adaptive and the innate immune system. Innate is, well, as the name says, it's innate, so it's intrinsic to you. They are ready to go. So when they're born, they're ready to do whatever function they need to do. So these are, for instance, neutrophils in the blood. So they make out a very big portion of your white blood cells would be neutrophils, and they're kind of the first line of attack. They don't have to be trained in a particular way, so they're kind of they're ready to go. There's also monocytes that you can find in the blood. Then they can migrate into tissue, become a macrophage. You might have heard about macrophages. So macrophages typically occur in the tissue. You don't see them in the blood. So this is also like a developmental path of a monocyte becoming a macrophage in tissue. And depending on the signals they get in a particular tissue, there are different flavors of macrophages, M1, M2, depending on what kind of effective functions they carry out in the tissue. There's also dendritic cells, so they are antigen-presenting cells, so they kind of show antigens to various, for instance, T cells. And so you might have heard the major distinction, or back in the day, the distinction was, well, the innate versus the adaptive. The adaptive, because it has been trained, one of its advantages, it takes time to train it. But once it's trained, it has memory. So this is, for instance, what you're trying to achieve with a vaccine. Or this is what happens after an infection. After an infection, basically you go through one round of training. You might have B cell involvement, T cell involvement, and then you have T cell and B cell memory. So you, after the immune response, it peaked, to clear out whatever happened to you. And afterwards, you can't keep that many cells around because you have this massive clonal expansion of immune cells. To have the numbers, you go at war, you have to have an army. So you expand, you proliferate all these various immune cells, but then they contract again. But then there's a little, after the little tail, there's something remaining. And these are then memory cells that, upon a second encounter with that same pathogen or that same antigen, they carry out their function way quicker. So that's why after an infection, typically you don't get that second infection again, because that part of the immune system reacted immediately, was able to carry out very specific targeting of that pathogen, and it was cleared before you actually really developed the disease. So that's what the vaccines try to mimic. They try to mimic that, oh, you had that encounter before, so when it comes around again, you can immediately react against, because the adaptive immune system takes a couple of weeks to get going. Now that distinction of memory versus, well, the innate is there, ready to act, that's perfect, right? But it doesn't have memory. That concept is not true anymore to a large extent. We now call this trained immunity. So trained immunity is kind of an innate memory, or the memory of so-called innate immune cells, like monocytes or macrophages or things like that. And so what maybe a couple of decades ago we didn't fully understand is that when these type of cells do their function, or exert a particular effective function during an immune response, it changes them. But it's more subtle, it's not like those big shifts in the memory population of T cells or B cells. It's more subtle. It happens on an epigenetic level, so that the expression of particular genes that then carry out that code for particular proteins that have an immune function, those genes are then modified in such a way that upon a second encounter, the production of a protein would be either enhanced or reduced. So there is an imprint, and we call this trained immunity. So both sides have so-called memory in different, but they do it in different ways. So if you talk about really being immune against something, you're mostly talking about the adaptive immune system and the T cells and the B cells. So that being said, so it is very complicated, and we're just scratching the surface. Once you go into tissues and things like that, then I mean immunology is learning. I mean, immunology is very good at creating boxes. Okay, that cell is this based on, and then the identification criteria of these different immune cell subsets, changes a bit over time, depending not of the major ones, but the subsets of these immune cells. The identification criteria changes over time based on the methods of identifying them. And so it can get really, really complicated. And that's why a high level of expertise typically is sought in one little subdomain of the immune system, because you cannot cover it all. You would have to read all the time just to be on top of your game for a particular immune mechanism. And so with that very brief overview of the immune system, how can you say, or what is the characteristics of a strong immune system? It's a typical title of a content creator, 5 ways to strengthen your immune system, something like that. Now, I've spent quite a few years working in the field of nutrition, and particularly in the field of nutrition, they love that kind of semantics. They love to say, well, boost your immune system with X, Y, and Z, or this is a supplement that boosts blah blah. To me, honestly, strengthening the immune system, that small little sentence, doesn't mean anything. It has no meaning whatsoever. It doesn't, I wouldn't know what you mean with that. And that's the problem, it's almost like clickbait. It's, you put that on a supplement or boost the immune system. It doesn't mean anything. I literally wouldn't be able to tell what your supplement does. And the reason for that is, what are typically people looking for when they look for an immune supplement or something that helps the immune system? Well, there might be for instance, at least two big different scenarios. One is, well, it's kind of flu season, you have exams and you want to protect yourself so that you don't come down with with a little flu, or flu-like symptoms, or a little rhinovirus infection, and you just want to be able to cover yourself in the winter, or you have things like allergies, or things like autoimmune conditions. So what does it mean then to strengthen the immune system? Because the thing is, so in the immune system, you can't call it bipolar. They're not two polar opposites, because there's so many flavors of the immune responses, right? But like if we want to simplify a little bit, you have, for instance, defense effector functions, right? Things that protect you against pathogens, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and even then there's different flavors in that, right? So how you defend yourself against a virus is not how you defend yourself against a bacteria or a fungi. So you have attack, and then on the other side you have a regulatory component, which is very important. So if you have an autoimmune condition, something is wrong with your regulatory function, because you're not supposed to attack yourself. And it's quite fitting that this year the Nobel laureates in medicine have been recognized for identifying the regulatory T cell, Treg, which is one of the main components. It's a major component in regulating immune responses within the body. Without Tregs, and there are genetic conditions where you kind of lack that component, well, you're kind of in trouble, because the immune system is going to attack you left, right, and center, and it's very unpleasant. So you have an attack component and a regulatory component. So what are you strengthening? You're not strengthening anything. If I would have to define, if someone asked me, okay, well, I force you to define what a strong immune system is, it would be almost like a very strong dynamic tension between those elements. So you want to have a strong attack or effector function component, and you want at the same time have a very strong regulatory component. Because without both, you're in trouble. If you can't defend yourself, you're in trouble. If you can't regulate yourself, you're in trouble. So a strong immune system is where every single component is strong and there's a strong dynamic tension between them, so that everything that the immune system needs to do, there's enough capacity to do it. Nothing is lacking, because it's like if you have strings, every component of the immune system, you have strings attached to all of them, and if suddenly one component is kind of missing, it drags, like all the other components are dragging the entire immune system in a particular direction, which might create disease or is pathogenic. So a strong immune system cannot be properly defined. It's like you would have to look at every single component, and because every single component relies on specific cells, specific effector functions, there's nothing that actually boosts your entire immune system. You would have to, if you would talk about, supplements or nutrition or things like that, you have to look very in fine detail what is it exactly that you're trying to strengthen. And so what I'm also kind of not annoyed, but where I really want to say, hang on, this thing needs to be developed in a bit in more detail. The thing is with the immune system is probably the most important phase in your life for your immune system is the first year, or sometimes people say the first 1,000 days of your life. So the first few years of your life. And to some extent also before that, right? There's epigenetic imprinting from the mother to the embryo. So you're also born with some kind of predispositions. But what happens typically right after birth in the first years is really critical. You are, again, we'll talk about that later, but you are typically immediately colonized by the microbiome of your mother if you have a natural birth. So you have this flooding of your gastrointestinal tract by a lot of bacteria, and your immune system immediately, the neonatal immune system, immediately reacts to that. And over the first year or a couple of years, there's this very dynamic interactions between those two elements to reach, ideally, symbiosis, where your gut microbiome helps the immune system staying healthy. But initially, it's that, hang on, what are you doing here? You're foreign, so that there is this initial plug and play, this kind of intimate interrelationship within the microbes and the immune system in the gastrointestinal tract to achieve a balance, homeostasis. This is also one of the reasons why, in terms of cell numbers, or the majority of your immune system is in the gastrointestinal tract, because this is where you're exposed to most of the bugs. Well, you always think about, well, maybe the lung, the skin, but like in terms of bacterial load, your gut trumps everything. There's so many bacteria in there that has to be regulated. And in terms of symbiosis, not like attack your gut because there's all these bacteria in there. No, they're there for a reason. And if your gut lining is intact, they're actually not supposed to penetrate. I mean, some component penetrate. This is part of the interaction, of the healthy interaction between the immune system and the microbiome. But this symbiotic relationship is active. It's not just passive. It's an active discussion relationship between those two things. It's actively maintained. And so when it comes to discussing where you go to a nutritionist, or you go to a GP, or you say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, or you listen to ads, or someone tries to sell you a supplement, the question is, are they trying to sell you something that actually is going to work? Because some things, after the first few years of life, I wouldn't say they're pretty much set, but it's going to give you a major life trajectory, like where your immune system is headed. Because this initial training stage is a big directional shift. It's going to go like that way. Of course, after a while, if it goes the wrong direction, you can still try to modify the course, but it's going to be very tedious to do in your adult life. So it's important to distinguish these two things. So if you're talking about infant, for instance, how you strengthen the immune system in an infant versus an adult are two completely different things. And it takes a lot of understanding to really tease these things apart. And also, so in the gastrointestinal tract, not only are there all these bugs, but there are all these nutritional components, your food. And so food shouldn't be attacked. What happens if you have celiac disease? Suddenly you can't eat wheat anymore, or gluten, because there's something you react against, or you have another allergen. So this it's in this interaction. It's in a constant change. The immune system, every single day, every single minute, every single second, there is an active discussion between your immune system, other cells in your body, and the outward environment and nutritional components. And so there are ways to engage into that discussion with actively to say, well, this discussion isn't going the right way. I mean, stop yelling at each other. We need to calm down and bring something in that, but the discussion is different at different stages of life, is different in different compartments of your body, the gut versus the lung versus the skin. And there's still a lot to learn. So if you think about the immune system, think about, well, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about the skin? Do you have eczema? Are we talking about the gut? Do you have IBD? Do you have celiac disease? Are we talking about the lung? Do you have lung inflammation, COPD? This is what's important. It is extremely specialized, and the discussion is ongoing in your body all the time. And yes, I mean, to some extent, if you are born in conditions that aren't ideal, where the discussion just goes away and components are starting to yell at each other, you may have to play catch up later in life, and you may have to do things that might be a bit more extreme just to be able to veer the immune system into a more healthy direction. Or you might have to have fecal transplantation, or just try to just start your microbiome from scratch because, I don't know, you were born maybe with a C-section and you have really big issues. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about what is a strong immune system, what's something that boosts the immune system. That terminology doesn't mean anything. So if you really want to learn about these things, you need to really familiarize yourself with some kind of higher level immunology, where you know what are these people trying to sell me? You know, is it any good? You know, what's vitamin C? What are all these things? You know, they keep telling me, oh, eat or drink that, and it's very difficult to get health claims on these things. You know, it's like companies have to do a lot of work for nutritional components. I mean, so supplemental components to get particular health claims. So typically, what is written on the bottles, it's not a health claim. That's how it's marketing. And so if you're not paying attention, you might just pay a lot of money for things that aren't actually doing much. So we talked a bit about the nutrition, about the different immune components. As I initially mentioned, there's a lot of discussion around inflammation and aging. You know, there's a lot of hype I feel in the last few years around the fields of longevity and aging, and the immune system, as it does. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, but it has emerged in that field of longevity and aging as one of the components that is critical for dictating longevity, or at least has a significant influence on it. And inflammation certainly drives or reduces your longevity. So the more inflamed you are, the faster your biological age will increase. And so then there's all these ways of, or what people try to say, well, how are you gonna live longer? Well, you need to limit inflammation. So inflammation, it's a bit like strengthening the immune system. Inflammation doesn't mean anything. It's too vague. It's like strengthening the immune system. Inflammation doesn't mean anything. Inflammation, well, you open a textbook of immunology, well, the cardinal signs of inflammation, redness, swelling, you know, like, oh yeah, I bumped myself, like, oh yeah, now it's inflamed because it's red, hot, and swollen. But mechanistically, you could have, for instance, an inflammation based on an infection. You scratch yourself outside and you have suddenly your wound is inflamed because you have bacteria in the wound, and then you have antibacterial defense mechanism that induce those cardinal signs of inflammation. You can also have allergic inflammation of the lungs. You have asthma. Both are inflammation, but both are completely different. If you wanted to block both of these things, you would use completely different things because it's completely different immune pathways. We have these, I mean, we love to, in immunology, we love to categorize things based on cytokines, you know, so you have type 1 cytokines, type 2 cytokines. So type 1 is kind of what defense mechanisms, you know, mostly involved in clearing infections. Type 2, allergic, IL-4, IL-13, interleukin 4 and 13, Then you have type 17, typically for fungi. So interleukin 17 is one of these. Then people start to call, well, that is also like a Th9, so based on IL-9. So it depends how granular you want to be with those things. But all these things can be part of an inflammatory reaction. But today, I mean, today there's a lot of biologics on the market. You know, a lot of companies working on blocking these different cytokines. Against allergies, there's dupilumab, an anti-IL-4, IL-13 receptor antibody, monoclonal antibody, and you have checkpoint inhibition in cancer. You have all these different antibodies that target one particular aspect of the immune system. And so if you're talking about longevity and how can I reduce inflammation? Well, like we would have to look within you, what are the sources of your inflammation? You might be a little bit allergic against everything, or you might be completely blank, like you're not allergic at all. Your parents weren't allergic and you're completely fine. Or you have kind of fungal infection or things like that. And so it's not entirely clear what type of inflammation we're talking. So if I look back at the studies that really started to bring out these correlations between biological age and immune correlates in humans, that's the problem. You know, in animals, what you typically do if you do mouse immunology, you rarely, if ever, look at the blood. A mouse only has a couple of milliliters of blood. So why people are so attracted to animal work is that you look straight into the organs, which you cannot do in humans. You might get the odd biopsy if you can, if it's ethically feasible and logistically feasible. But in humans, like the large majority of all immunology will be done with blood cells. And we've gotten really, really good at in blood detecting various things, or at least things that correlate with other things that are happening in different organs, because you cannot readily just go into the organ and grab a piece. You know, you can't do that in humans. And so for the time being, what really this correlation, we don't know if it's causative, right? But like the correlations between immune factors in the blood and biological age in humans, a major component of that are terminally differentiated T cells. So T cells, I told you, so there's different flavors of them. So if you're looking at cytotoxic T cells, so T cells that would have reacted against various infections throughout your life, because we're looking at the memory compartment of that. Your memory compartment, to some extent, accumulates memory, right? So infection after infection, your immune system gets trained, and over the course of your biological age, you will have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different pathogens and potential little mini infections that you might have not even been aware of. All of them have the potential to create a little bit of memory. And in that developmental part of the T cell, at the end, there's a terminally differentiated effector T cell. And there's different ways to identify it in the blood. And the more of those you have, that's indicative of biological age. So almost is like, what's your immunological age? How many infectious or threatening events did your immune system has your immune system seen? And so there are these correlations, and again, the causation we'll have to see, right? There's causation is cannot be really done in humans at this stage. That's why you again revert back to animal experimentation and try to see, well, if you try to limit X, Y, and Z, can you actually reduce biological age? So there's been a couple of years ago, there's been this experiment where if you take old mice and young mice, and you do something where it's ethically a bit, in some countries it's easier to get through ethics committees than others, but it's called parabiosis. So parabiosis is when you hook up the circulatory system, so the blood system of two animals. In this case, what people did is they hooked up an old mice to a young mice, so they share the same circulatory. So they have the same blood, like the same blood. They share the same blood, and so they've done that for the mouse extended period of time. So I think they've done for a few months. I think so. The mice stayed hooked up to each other for a couple of months. But they could doing that, they could reduce or they could increase the lifespan of the old mice by 6 to 9%. So that's significant. That's a lot of time. 6 to 9%. We're boarding at 10%. So that's quite significant. So something in the blood is impacting that. So if you bring it back to the human system, well, is it just that you have more younger immune cells? They haven't been to war that many times, and they're not as inflammatory, because those terminally differentiated T cells. The problem is that they start also to leak a bit of cytokine. So they're so terminally differentiated that they release a lot of pro-inflammatory effector molecules, and this is what might drive senescence. Now the problem is, going back to, we need to talk about individuals. We're talking about individuals. What have you seen throughout your lifetime? How many, or do you have allergies? Have you seen a lot of infectious agents? Have you seen a lot of allergens that you react against? Typically, there's also one major confounder, if you're looking at terminally differentiated effector T cells in humans, is CMV infections. So it depends on your country, but typically half the population is CMV. It's cytomegalovirus positive. So it's a herpes virus. You can live with it without any problem. It becomes problematic if you have a lowered immune system. So in transplant patients that get immunosuppressive drugs, CMV can become a problem. And CMV, the problem is it stays with you. So once you get it, it stays with you for the rest of your life. It's like a herpes virus. Every once in a while it comes out, and then the immune system says, "Hey, go back where you came from," and so it hides again, and then after a while it comes back out again, checks, dips the toe in the water. Oh shit, the immune system is still there, and so you have all these ticks, and that over time you have always this constant trickling of antigen, and that drives what we also call an inflationary, like comes from inflation, like constant prices constantly increase. Well, those effector T cells that react against CMV have that, they constantly increase as well. So coming back to a very easy concept to grasp is, the more you're exposed to and the more you drive that differentiation of the immune system towards the high end effector function, the more you have these cells that, well, first of all, they're tired. So at that stage, they're terminally differentiated, exhausted / slightly mildly inflammatory, which is basically what constitutes the conundrum in immunological senescence. You have an immune system that doesn't react really well, but it's still inflammatory. So you have that very old army, those very old soldiers. They're exhausted, but they're also very aggressive, right? It's because they had enough. So they're weak, but somehow they're still causing trouble. And it's one of the things. And so because you might think we know so much about the immune system, but the specific mechanism of what triggers an immune response or what constitutes an antigen, we still really fully understand what is the characteristic of an allergen, something that causes an allergic reaction. We're still thinking, is it because it's this shape, this shape? Is it because it's an enzyme, because it releases different things in tissues? So all these things, the fine details, we're still working on it. There's still so many things we don't know. So we're very good at pumping things in the environment, either in your food or the other environment, but we have no idea whether it actually engages something in the immune system we haven't discovered yet. So if you're looking at that concept of inflammation, there is truth to, but we still have to uncover the causative mechanism behind it. But it seems to be the rule that, well, you're getting really old based on your immunological history, based on what you're exposed to. And the problem is we cannot properly define that because we don't know exactly what constitutes a threat to the immune system. And inflammation, or of course inflammation can be, well, the cardinal signs of inflammation, of course you know yourself, you know if you hurt yourself, right? But the issue here is not when you hurt yourself, is the thing that you don't notice. You might have a constant trickle of inflammatory processes in your body without you noticing it. You only notice it once you're kind of 50 and you look 10 or 20 years older than someone else that was in the same primary school or something like that. Then suddenly you realize what effect these small little things daily or every 5 minutes or on a moment-to-moment basis, what's happening all the time. That's the problem. All the things you don't see, you don't feel it, but you're constantly exposed to it, and because you don't feel it, you're not removing it. Put your hand on a hot stove, you remove it immediately because you perceive the threat, but you don't sense immune reactions, you don't sense really cytokines if it's small, and that's the problem. And so we are in a situation where we live in a very modern environment, and we probably have no clue what things we're exposed to on a daily basis that constantly trigger immune reactions and that accelerate aging. Now let's talk about allergies and autoimmune conditions. So I recently also heard there was a guest on, I can't remember where I heard it or who it was, but they basically said, well, these are idiopathic, right? We don't know where they come from. Allergies, they show up one day, or autoimmune conditions, they show up one day, and and then you have it, and then you have to deal with it. Now that's not entirely true. I mean, we know a whole lot about where allergies come from. We have a problem with removing it. Like, allergy is a very hard one to break. Once you're sensitized against something, good luck. And autoimmune, that's the same thing, right? Once you broke that effector versus tolerance, like once the tolerance is kind of weak, well, then you're gonna have a big driver against tissue damage. But in the case of allergies, so we know quite a bit, because like if you're talking about, I'm not sure if we can talk about like if it has really like reach epidemic proportions, but there's definitely an increase in allergies throughout the last few decades. Since I've done a little bit of research into the gut microbiome, it's very clear that you're much more likely to have allergies if you were born with a C-section compared to a cesarean section compared to natural birth. Breastfeeding is also something to do with that, but we now appreciate that, as I said, that initial discussion or interaction between the microbiome and your immune system after birth and in the first year of life, it's critical. Like I mentioned, well, T cells go to school in the thymus to get properly educated. A lot of the immune system, a lot of that there's another school happening in the gastrointestinal tract where you have almost, well, I'm not sure if it's school because there's no teacher and there's no pupil. It's this kind of discussion where two sides figure it out together to have both benefits. The bacteria want to stay, and the immune system wants to be healthy and wants to keep the the kind of lining closed, so that the bacteria cannot easily enter the body, but can stay happily outside. And so, in terms of allergies, if that discussion wasn't a fruitful one, or the bacterial composition in your gastrointestinal tract is not appropriate to have a good discussion, you're much more likely to have allergies, because a lot of the regulatory component is in the gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract has to be, if we're talking, like, that's where it's absolutely crucial to have enough of a regulatory component, because that's where you have all the foods, innocuous food, and like food components that you should never react against, ideally. You have all these bacteria, so you have to have a very, very strong regulatory component. And the gastrointestinal tract, or immune cells, recirculate to different sites. So if something happens in the gastrointestinal tract, through recirculation, some immune cells stay put. There's resident memory, the concept of resident memory. So once you encounter something, you actually stay where you are, because based on logic, it's likely that the second time you see it, it's going to be at the same site, because if something comes through the lung, the second time that bug comes, it's likely to be through the lung. So usually memory cells, a lot of them stay put where they are, because, I'm going to stay here just to see if they come again. But there's also recirculation, and there's crosstalk between different organs. So that's where what happens in the gut initially is very important against allergies. But it's also, we know that looking at, as I said, the immune system is very different in different organs. While the immune system tends to be quite tolerogenic in the gastrointestinal tract, so there's a lot of a big regulatory component to it. In the skin, it's slightly different, because the skin is not typically exposed to things it shouldn't be exposed to. If something hits your skin or passes through the skin, it's likely to be something you don't want to have in your body, right? It's not like the gastrointestinal tract where there's food coming through, right? And so the skin is not exactly tolerogenic. So allergies, a lot of times based on what we understand about allergic reaction, starts in the skin in early infancy as eczema. And then eczema, if you have eczema as a child, you're more likely to have allergic rhinitis, or you have food allergies later on in life. So there's almost like a sequential happening of that allergy within your body. We call this the allergic march. So it's marching on from one organ to the next. And so it is very much so, if you have that initial fruitful conversation between the gut microbiome and the immune system early on in life, things tend to go pretty well. Another thing, so while you have that discussion, a major element of that discussion is the actual allergen. So the peanut protein or the wheat has to be part of that initial discussion with the gut microbiome and the immune system. And this is also why at some stage as we didn't fully understand exactly how an allergic reaction or how allergic sensitization occurs, there was a time when we said where we need to remove allergens, introduce allergens later on in life, maybe when it's safe. And that's the mistake we did, because we removed a part of the one component of the discussion early on, and then once everything was set, we brought another one we brought the allergen into the discussion, and then the discussion was not really fruitful. So allergens have to be introduced fairly early on, so that it's part of that discussion slash education of these different components. And the thing is, so once you have, so ideally, and I'll come back to that at the very end, if I had one thing to say, keep it natural. The more you deviate from things that happen as they should or as nature intended them, the more you're messing with something that, again, as immunologists, we don't yet fully understand. There's things we still don't fully understand, but based on based on human biology, if you do it as it was done or thought to be done, not in a modern environment, but what is a natural way of doing things, you're more likely to succeed or to have a good immune system that doesn't overreact. And so there's another interesting thing about the immune system. And for instance, one allergy, which is interesting, it's based on molecular mimicry. So as I mentioned before, the immune system reacts against antigens. And so the more antigens react against, that might be driving aging. So the more things so an antigen is nothing like, the definition of an antigen is something that your immune system recognizes. It doesn't have a definition beyond that. And so the antigen for a T cell is just like a polypeptide. So it's just like a sequence of amino acids. 8 to 10 amino acids long for CD8 T cells, a bit longer for CD4 T cells. Sometimes it can be a bit smaller if it hooks up to something else. But for an antibody, it's more like a 3D structure, and can be very, very small. And so what happens is sometimes that the antigen, either as a sequence of amino acids or as a topological small little 3D structure, based on statistics, sometimes two things look exactly the same. One of them might be found in your body, another one might be found outside of your body. So sometimes something comes through, bacteria or something else, and your immune system attacks it very ferociously, only then to realize that, hang on, that little structure that I attacked, and if your immune system reacts against a larger structure, even like a virus is very big, like bacteria is very big, so it attacks only a tiny little component of it. But maybe a tiny bit of that component looks exactly the same as something that one of your cells in your heart look like or express, or a specific protein. So molecular mimicry is nothing else than mistaking something for something else because it looks identical. So there's I'm just mentioning this because I remember that really odd phenomena of alpha-gal syndrome, which is I think it was found in the US, I think, where if you have a tick bite and your immune system reacts and you drive an antibody response against one small little element of what's coming through with your tick bite, that galactose, like a little moiety or that little antigenic structure, looks identical in red meat. And then suddenly you have a tick bite and then suddenly you become allergic to red meat. That's because these things look identical, like a tiny, tiny bit of those two things look identical to the immune system, and it cannot tell the difference. This can also, switching a little bit to autoimmunity now, of course, autoimmunity, it tends to come out of the blue. But from a anecdotal evidence point of view, or there's enough evidence to suggest that sometimes a lot of it is based on molecular mimicry, where you had an infection just before your autoimmunity started. You have something else happened where you react against something, and that kick-started or precipitated something that ultimately drove your immune system to react against yourself. So molecular mimicry is actually far more I mean, it occurs far more frequently than we initially thought. You think, oh man, how can two things look like completely identical? But every once in a while it does. And so autoimmunity, well, the thing with the alpha-gal, that was antibody-based, right? But a lot of immune reaction, a lot of autoimmunity is driven by T cells. So T cells that I just mentioned, they recognize like sequences of amino acids. And the problem with T cells is not like B cells or antibodies. T cells are MHC restricted. MHC is what you look for if you want to type a person, for instance, for organ transplantation. Oh, we need to figure out if you're a match. What does it mean, a match? So in all these settings, when they say we need to figure out whether we can find a match, they're looking at MHC. So you get, typically you have half of your MHC. So there's class 1 and class 2 molecules. You get half from your father, half from your mother. And that's exactly, so it's almost like a cup that holds the little sequence of amino acids, and your T cells comes and tries to see whether it recognizes it or not. If it doesn't recognize it, moves on. If it recognizes it, then it gets a signal to mature, to become a differentiated T cell, and then it's going to do something about it. But that MHC restriction of the T cells, that's exactly what makes sometimes autoimmunity more likely. So there are conditions, autoimmune conditions. So if you have a particular MHC, or we call them HLA in humans, your HLA, whatever, B27 or something like that, you're more likely to have a particular autoimmune condition. And that's because every single one of those cups, they bind slightly different polypeptides. So, which also means if you have, for instance, a viral infection, the pieces of the virus that you're going to see from a T cell point of view are different from the pieces that I'm going to see. So that's where you see that like your genetics is also playing a part of this. How likely are you to mix up the things that look identical? Because I might present something that looks identical between that and pieces of me, but you're never going to do that, because that piece that looks identical in those two different organisms or something like that, your MHCs are never going to present it. And a lot of people also, I think in that context I also heard something around, carnivore diet. A lot of people with autoimmune conditions are looking at carnivore diet. And it tends to limit the symptoms, people have a lot of symptomologies, whether it's properly autoimmune. People call autoimmune things without knowing whether it's actually autoimmune, whether you actually have an adaptive immune response against that thing or not, but you kind of inflamed and things like that. But it's a stretch to say it's autoimmune, because you would have to identify what are you actually reacting against. Type 1 diabetes, it's known what you react against, like the beta cells in your pancreas, and that's why you cannot produce insulin. So we know exactly what you're reacting against. Autoimmunity, sometimes we don't know exactly whether you react against something self or whether it's something else entirely. But the carnivore diet, again, it removes a lot from, it simplifies the diet extremely, right? Because then suddenly you would say that the majority of things where you have a diversity, that's the plant kingdom, things. So the fact that if you remove all these components and your diet becomes extremely simple, which is basically meat, you remove that, it gets better. There might be something to it. I worked in nutritional immunology. I can tell you, like, the ways in which the immune system or the body in general, including the immune system, recognizes different polyphenols, plant-derived, whatever, structurally or chemically, what you eat is so complex. You eat something and there's thousands and thousands of components chemically that you ingest. And sometimes we eat it and everything's fine, but in some people something reacts, and we don't know exactly which one of these 1,000 dietary metabolites that you actually react against. And we don't know that. So that it could be that you remove that and you become carnivore, and then suddenly you remove the antigen. And then the question is, do you have enough memory? If you remove the antigen, there might be enough memory in your body to still attack you, because you build a memory. So sometimes you remove the antigen, it removes most of the symptoms, but it's not properly cured. Same thing with allergies. If you use dupilumab and it works really well, there are some longer term studies where if you remove that drug, you still carry the allergic memory, so you cannot get off it. I mean, that's kind of the understanding we have so far. Perhaps at some stage they go away, that memory, but we don't know. The other thing is that with the carnivore diet, you remove all sugar, most of the sugars, all of the processed sugars for sure. And without going into detail, sugar, when they say, well, I'm allergic to sugar, or sugar drives blah blah, sugar doesn't do anything. Sugar is too small. It cannot be an allergen. It's immediately metabolized. But what it can do, it can change the metabolism of immune cells. Immune cells is just like a mini version of yourself. If you're into sports, sometimes they hook you up, they look at your gas exchange, and then you go on a treadmill, and then they can say, well, you're burning 70% fat and 30% sugar, or you go a bit harder out, maybe it's more carbohydrate versus lipid. That is just metabolism. The immune cells work exactly the same. If you load them with sugar, sugar typically enhances effector functions. So you can, if you have something that like if you have an underlying inflammatory process going on, you will boost it with sugar. The sugar itself is not inflammatory, but it will, if combined with something that's already happening in your body, will promote that. So you will have more inflammation. So the fact that you're cutting on all that could also limit the metabolism of the cell. Say, hey, calm down. You need to run slower. Cool. Go run on fats. Be happy. Things like that. And it could also be partly because of that. Geez, already spoken more than an hour. It takes a long time to discuss these things. So, trying to wrap up here. So, what would I say? How can you have a healthy immune system and be ultimately healthy in life? So as I said, we cannot avoid the fact that your initial setup in your first year or couple of years of life, that's something that was completely out of your control. We don't know how the initial setup of the immune system worked, whether it was beneficial, successful, symbiotic versus pathogenic. Things you couldn't control, where if you were born with a C-section, you were born with a C-section, so there are things you can potentially not easily correct in your life. You might have had imprints in your body, in utero, epigenetic imprints that impact your metabolism. Metabolism itself is a driver of inflammation, so being overweight will drive that. But again, that might be partly out of your hand. You might have genetic predispositions. You might have, in terms of general predispositions, but also in terms of your HLA type. You might be predisposed to have particular autoimmune conditions, and there's nothing you can do about it. Do you feel like you're reacting against milk, wheat? You might have all these, not necessarily allergies, but you feel that you have sensitivities against things. Sensitivity means that as soon as you feel it, of course, there's going to be something that's going to happen. Sometimes, a lot of people say that gluten is unhealthy intrinsically. It's gonna weaken a bit your gut barrier. Most people might not feel it, but if you feel it, there's definitely something that's going on, and that might drive an immune reaction. Also, obviously, genetic predisposition. If you're predisposed to cancer, again, cancer, genes that predispose you to have cancer, if you have it, if you have a familial, if you have something in the family, it's like you carry a gun. It doesn't mean that you're gonna have to that you're gonna press the trigger anytime in life. So even if you have a strong driver of cancer, it doesn't mean that you will develop the cancer. It depends on various environmental factors. But just to wrap it up, as I already said, ask yourself your question, how natural are you living? Because that a lot of what is healthy for the immune system is based on human biology, tested since a long time ago. Stress. If you have stress, you will be to some extent immune. You will be immune deficient, just to some extent. It depends how strong your stress is. If you want to investigate mild immune suppression, I'm not joking. In most studies, you just go to a medical school and you try to recruit some med students before exams. They will be mildly immune suppressed. So, stress, if you want to have a strong immune system, stop popping supplements. The first things to go, like the lowest hanging fruit, will be the big ones, like limiting stress, because we know stress reduces the immune system. Sleep. If you're not sleeping enough, it's part of the stress. Obviously, it's part of the stress mechanisms. You will also be immune suppressed. In terms of nutrition, we know a lot of things. Going back to a natural diet, you wouldn't have any deficiencies. But nowadays, you can have deficiencies based on what you eat on a regular basis. There's a lot of vitamins that influence the immune system. Vitamin C. So vitamin C, I always hear, because it's antioxidant. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's probably something else, because vitamin C is a very important cofactor for TET enzymes. So it might be that's what drives actually its impact on the immune system. And again, you wanna have mildly vitamin C deficient individuals, you go to students. They don't eat fruits, no vegetables, and they will be mildly vitamin C deficient. What its impact has, again, it depends on other factors. It's all these factors merge together, and then you see, do you have a phenotype or not? So vitamin C, definitely you can take supplements if you don't eat fruit on a regular basis. Vitamin D, sunlight. If you don't go to the sun, vitamin D is a very important component of, or drives, very important for immune function. Vitamin A as well, retinoic acid in the gastrointestinal tract is very important for, again, that maintaining that tolerogenic environment in the gastrointestinal tract. So you cannot, all these vitamins are there, they call vitamins for a reason, because things that you cannot produce yourself, if you don't have it, and your body is meant to have it for normal function, well, you will have a problem. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe 10 years down the line you will. Fiber in the microbiome. One of the main issues is, and it's true. What people say, you eat for the microbiome as well. So in your small intestines, that's where you feed yourself, right? That's where all the nutrients, the fats, the macronutrients are coming through to feed yourself. In the large intestine, this is where you have the bulk of your microbiome. This is where the microbial load will be the biggest in your body. And whatever you haven't absorbed for yourself in the small intestine, that's going to trickle through to the large intestine, and that the leftovers is what your bacteria get as food. And fiber is more or less the only thing that's left, because everything else you took for yourself. So what else? You cannot utilize fiber. You can't, but your bacteria can. So you need to have enough fiber, and the more diverse sources of fiber, the better, so that you can maintain, so fiber is a prebiotic, which feeds the probiotics, so the bacteria, which then release postbiotics, which are very important components of the microbiome that than you can absorb, like short chain fatty acids, for instance. So yeah, I mean, just natural things. Like, I think when I hear a lot of people talking about supplements, it shouldn't be anything like the lowest hanging fruit will be probably 80 or 90% of your immunological health. So do things naturally, and then you shouldn't need any supplements. Take supplements if something is absent from your diet, yes. Limit your stress, but that's most of it. Of course, if you are diseased, I'm not like, drugs are wonderful. What we know about the immune system, all the different drugs that we generated in the last kind of 50 years, just understanding immune system, being able to block components, it's like magic. But this is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You should never jump, like you should never push yourself over the cliff. But it's nice to have ambulances down there. But take care of yourself, and if you have any questions with particular aspects of that, it's a hard topic to cover without talking very specifically about specific diseases or specific components, because there is so much information. The immune system is so complex, and every single element has to be by itself is worth talking an hour over. But this is more generally, I wanted to give that talk, because sometimes it's not appropriately presented, and it's sometimes a bit oversimplified, and it doesn't give justice. Or if you have a particular problem and then suddenly you hear something that's overly simplified and you follow the advice, it might actually not be for you, because it didn't talk about your specific condition or your specific immunological state. So that's it for this part, and next time I will talk about the different vaccines, or I will talk about vaccines in general, and how this piece is part of the puzzle, and what might happen with side effects, or the different types of vaccines, and what exactly this mRNA platform is doing, and how it works, and my viewpoint on potentially things that haven't been really addressed as well in that area. So stay tuned. Hopefully I'll be able to post the second part soon. But yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.